Hello. I'm making this video as a tool to help navigate some of the information and data that I've placed online into a centralized resource library as a follow up to some of the conversations that we've had around a multiplicity of intersecting housing related conversations, and hopefully can be leveraged to mount some focused campaigns and demands for more data from public entities. The launching place, the launching domain for this is at timetogetup.live. That domain is, for right now, forwarded to a very simplistic website that's built in Google Site Builder. This was sort of intentionally simplistic for a lot of reasons. One, primarily, is that moving forward, um, people don't have to have web building skills. They don't have to log into an overcomplicated like WordPress dashboard just to add content and to build out this resource library. So if you go to timetogetup.live, that will bring you here to this page. I'm also assuming, making this video, that we've had recent-ish conversation or a info dump, and so I'm not going to spend a lot of time providing background information as I browse through some of these things. So we're going to start here on this page. If you go up to home under strike price, that will bring you to this page that contains some of the things that we've talked about and some of the things that we haven't. This strike price underutilized lots map can be viewed as it is embedded in the page. It can also be downloaded. It's also included in the resource library, which is where I recommend, if you really want to take a close look, I recommend that you download it from the resource library itself and open it up in Acrobat Reader so that you can really get the detailed view. There's some information here, obviously, that I think is an important foundation when we start creating talking points around strike price, and why that phrasing that the city is using is really important to understanding what's at play. Some of the other important things in here, I was able to extract the lot level, tax lot level information from that map and pull it into um, a mapping program to create some other tools that will help us moving forward in cross-referencing with other types of data. So you'll see that represented here. And then there's a slideshow to be able to kind of provide some of those insights in terms of where the residential infill project concentrated heat map intersects with other things like housing costs, burdens, diversity indexes, and so forth. Know that these images have also been added to the resource library as standalone, so that makes it easier for them to be shared or used in other types of publications. This video here is one that I made that provides some context in general in terms of Wall Street financialization, brings it back and forth and zooms in into sort of the local impact of the residential infill project, how that relates to the bigger picture. This, I think, is sort of a foundational standpoint to understand the way that I personally talk about things, some of the phrasing, and some of the things that I repeat over and over again, both in the big picture and the local picture. This video here is queued up to a very short, 2 minutes, 3-minute testimony at the Portland City Council, where we tried to at least get some of this impact of the residential infill project on the record visually. It was a struggle. The mayor was a bit hesitant, and they had to bring in some comment from the city attorney before they'd actually let me testify with these visuals. But it's queued up there. And then we've also got, I've embedded 2 other podcasts where we talk about these same things in a more conversational format with Q&A. So all of these things I think are pretty foundational to understanding and getting on the same page, and particularly just sort of interpreting, if you will, some of my viewpoint as I put information out there, and as we hopefully collaborate to be able to parcel some of that out into more easily digestible and more focused talking points and visualizations. There's a link here, required reading page, some other stuff that we'll fill in, but I want to move in now to the resource library itself. So this is a starting point, a work in progress, but this directory structure, this is on a Google Drive. So everything that we're going to be clicking on or linking to is public for anybody who has a link. And we'll organize this as time moves forward. But one of the first things I want to do, I think, actually, is modify, rename these folders so that they can be sort of presented from the front end into a more prioritized list. 1, 2, 3, 4, with the file at the bottom. But I wanted to get this out here first. So again, this is going to be sort of an ongoing work in progress. But I think this is a good place to start as a follow up. So as a segue from the landing page to talk about the residential infill project RIP strike price map that was provided circuitously to other processes that had some transparency, that was provided to developers nearly 2 years before RIP's passage. A place to start for some more insight in that is the land use deregulation. So we're going to start taking a look at the resource library here with land use deregulation. Portland Residential Info Project. And now, we're here in Drive, obviously, so we can also, once we get in here, move around as you see fit. But I'm going to be toggling back and forth between a list view and a thumbnail view so that you can have a visual cue of some of the things that are in here. You'll see here too that in most of these folders where it's applicable, I've also created Google Docs with like relevant links. So anywhere you see one of those documents, there'll be some links that I thought were important, and I tried not to overburden those. Let's go back here. All right. So you'll see here this document at the top of the list. This I'm gonna blow this up a little bit. We'll zoom in here a little bit. So at the top of the list here, this is the actual map in PDF format. I recommend that you download it. And then some of those things that we saw in the slideshow are also here as individual JPEGs. And there's a folder for RIP related and or adjacent. This was also a map that was provided to private developer interest by the Planning Sustainability Commission around the same time, where they did on public time and dollars a study of housing that had sold at basically below market, and also provided them with sales data. Ultimately, what we want through sort of a multiplicity of strategies where we can do some of the focused work to be able to say this is just the tip of the iceberg, and then make some demands to say the city is providing all of this data at taxpayers' expense to opportunistic speculators, and yet there is no transparency. There are no public data portals for things like sales data that lists comprehensive who owns what, who's buying what, who's flipping what. So that's kind of an explanation of this level of detail in the resource library. So back here at this directory structure, dovetailing into the big question, who's buying, who owns what, and both at the local level and then nationwide, especially when we're talking about Wall Street landlords. There's 2 places within this structure to look for those. So real estate industry reports, abundance and shortage myths, national, etc., and PDX Metro. Under the PDX Metro folder, this document here, this Excel spreadsheet, PDX Metro significant multifamily sales. I'm going to show you a glimpse of that spreadsheet. I recommend that if you have Excel locally, that you download this. There are some summaries that are created in pivot tables. And if you want to work with that data, rather than just opening it from Google Drive, where it'll still display it for you, but Google Drive, is getting friendlier when it comes to some of the more advanced functions in Excel. But again, you really want to work with the data. I recommend just downloading this and opening it in Excel. And I'm going to show you a glimpse of it here. All right, so when you open the spreadsheet, there's a couple tabs here. I'm just going to give you a little bit of narrative to go around this. Signature sales is where we started. there are various industry reports that publish quarterly what they call signature sales, which tends to be large multifamily sales over X millions, and it's different for different publications. Started compiling this data back to 2015. There are some publications that are incomplete, so we don't have all the seller and buyer information, but you can see here that I've been tracking things like the number of units, sale price, and then if it's provided, or if not, we can calculate the price per unit, price per square foot, year built, sale date. We've also grouped these together. Sometimes they're calling things by different names. So we've also gone through and tried to normalize this as much as possible, even though some of the stuff is incomplete, so that we can start seeing and grouping things together, not only in terms of properties that may have been sold and resold multiple times over X time span, but also just buyer and seller names, how those are referred to. So it's sort of the starting point. Created some pivot tables based on this data. Again, this is just a subset of a subset, just those things that typically the brokers of these sales are publicizing in order, to further their own interest, to say, hey, like, come to us, we're brokering all of these big deals. So we've got signature sales by buyer, signature sales by seller. One moment, please. All right, so signature sales by buyer, signature sales by seller. These are in pivot tables. So if you do download it locally, you can use this to take a look at things in different ways if you need to. Flips. Again, because not all of the data is complete, this just gives us a glimpse and some leverage that says this is important data. We can see that there are these large, 200, 300, 400 unit complexes that are being purchased and flipped. And each time they're getting flipped, somebody's making, millions more dollars on the sale. This also, when we start having conversations about the impact of rent-backed securities and the financialization of housing and vacancies, and some of the nuances of and some of the questions people ask, how is it that it's quote unquote profitable for all of these units to remain vacant? And as artifacts of speculation, when we start understanding at a baseline how some of those mechanics work and why, and then we can see some of this data that is easy to consume, that resonates, that says, here's just some flipping on a massive scale. And who's doing a lot of the flipping? You'll see BlackRock, Blackstone, Holland Partner Group. These are big players here. So this is what the flips tab gives us to move forward with. And then that sort of begs the question that says, well, if we're only getting a subset of a subset out of these quarterly reports, what's the big picture locally? And so Multifamily Northwest and CoStar are both the most reliable and consistently relied upon sources for that kind of data. So you'll see here that pulled in here in this CoStar tab, a combination so that we can see the best estimates provided by the industry itself for the last 10 years of Portland Metro multifamily sales. Now, this doesn't include single family homes, duplexes, triplexes. CoStar actually breaks out these numbers by property class. So Class A, 4 and 5 star, that's luxury new construction. Class B and C, value-added properties. This is where these are mostly occupied at the time of sale. Class C in particular tend to be much older buildings, therefore the rents are a lot lower. This is where the concentration of what's called naturally affordable housing is. So we can see this total broken out by those classes. You can see here that over 10 years, we're talking in the Portland metro area, almost $13 billion, acquiring almost 80,000 units of Class B and C, almost $11 billion in 10 years, acquiring 42,000 units. And then the average price per unit, where this becomes important in the conversation also, is when we're talking about this focus on needing affordable housing and all of the taxpayer money that's going to fund building new affordable units, but not a lot of focus talking about how do we preserve and maintain or oppose or have any sort of right to like a community right of purchase to stem the tide of Wall Street's voracious appetite and seemingly endless supply of capital to buy and flip. So that's where average price per unit and these totals I also pulled in just to be able to juxtapose price per unit development cost versus the acquisition cost. This is just a snapshot of Portland Metro affordable housing bond projects for a token number of units and 10 or less new builds. The average cost per unit in development costs is almost double or more the acquisition costs for global private equity, both for existing Class B and C, and even expensive new unsubsidized developments. So taxpayers are really putting the bill here on a lot of levels. So this is included here, and that's how that dovetails into some of those other stats that are being consolidated here. And then here is just a 2022 top Portland buyers as reported by the Barrier Apartment Group report. Again, just sort of another snapshot as reported by the folks that talk behind the paywalls to that level of investor. So that's where I've put some of this information in terms of a local level with multifamily acquisitions. All right, so going back to that directory in the resource library, you'll see, hopefully we've talked about, there was a 2015 study by Investigate West that sort of started this conversation about Wall Street landlords who is buying a property and with cash predominantly. So there's some links in this document to elements of that study, and then some other things for conversation. Specifically also, these graphics that are referencing vacancies, and I think these are really important when the industry and headlines talk about vacancies. They tend to represent the rental market as a sort of a consolidated vacancy rate rather than acknowledging the fact that new construction is building 90% of the units for 10% of the people that can afford them, while on the other hand, just gobbling up existing affordable units. So these are ways, I think, to really do a level set on that conversation about vacancies. These three in particular together. This one actually breaks out vacancy rates by 3-star, 4 and 5-star, and you can see that luxury new construction vacancy rates are in the double digits. They tend to bubble and hover in the double digits, whereas existing older 3-star Class B and C units, where a lot of the acquisitions are also happening, the vacancy units are low. This is where the majority of the need is. This is another way to look at it, especially when we're talking about that disparity between what's being built and for whom, and what's being consumed and not replaced in terms of affordability. Top 20% of rents, vacancy, up and up and up. Bottom 80% of rents, vacancy, down and down and down. This is a manufacturing shortage. And then this is what I call, vacancy fudging the numbers. It's also important to note that the industry itself understands that a lot of the dynamics that are happening here are creating a hyper surplus, especially at the top of the market. So what they do when they report vacancies is they exclude a lot of new construction, and there's a lot of new construction that is intentionally kept vacant for as artifacts of financialization. So this is a little excerpt from a Multifamily Northwest newsletter that provides some insight into something that the industry itself knows and acknowledges, and also this sort of validation of a talking point that says vacancies are being way underreported. Statistics exclude new projects in the lease-up phase that haven't reached stability unless they're over a year old and over 85% occupied. So there's a lot of stuff that's sitting vacant and not being included. In addition to even stuff that is being included, they cut those numbers by just giving the public a single number and say, well, vacancy rates are, 4%, when the reality is that vacancy rates at the top are in the double digits and vacancy rates at the bottom are in single. So that's these are some interesting things that I think bear looking at. There's some other things that I've put in here. We've got the Portland Metro Industry Reports. So a lot of these are the sources for that spreadsheet. But when we go through with a finer tooth comb, this is also where a lot of the like capitalist myth busting happens from their own words, particularly in the CoStar and Collier's quarterly reports, where they acknowledge over time things like hyper surplus or softening markets and then with lots of vibrato when everybody's making money. So this juxtaposed with the public facing narratives versus the industry facing narratives. There's a lot of really valuable pull quotes from the industry's own mouth that we can have from here. So these are worth spending some more time when we get around to it. And then there is also included in this some other things of interest. You'll see here that I included some screen caps of the spreadsheet summaries, that again to make it easy to embed or to use in moving forward in some other ways on socials or what have you. Some other interesting vacancy rates by class. Again, we've got some other things that show here, sales volume, prices per unit. Let's go back. On the national level, miscellaneous links. That's a good starting place. Also got included in here several reports of interest here. These top Wall Street private multifamily landlords. This is a 2018 study that was updated in 2019. These two are sort of companions to one another, as well as largest investors allocate 2.53 trillion to real estate. Some just really astounding numbers that you don't see in unless you're digging behind the paywall or in these specific sort of niche sites. So very easy to skim these articles. This research memo over here too is also incredibly important. Again, trying to get to some estimates, just how much rental property and how much that is accelerating. Americans for Financial Reform, as well as the Private Equity Stakeholder Project. Those there's some links to that information over here in this miscellaneous links. And then this is sort of a longer read, but this is basically a consolidation throughout time. So there's are prefixed with the years in which these articles came out. And I called this abundance and shortage myths. And again, reading through over time, when the industry itself is speaking to itself, saying, there's a hyper surplus, the market is overbuilding, hyper supplied, overbuilding, and juxtaposing that with the public facing narratives, where the developers themselves say, boy, we just didn't build enough. After 2008, we were in the hole. The industry just like, now we need to make up for it. We need to churn this stuff out double, triple time because there's a shortage. As if coming out of the first bubble from finance deregulation in late 1999 to 2008 didn't create a hyper surplus of vacant housing as well. So these are a little more nuanced of a read, but that's kind of what this is. And then there's some of this that's national and some of this that's local, and it all kind of feeds into the same dueling narratives. And then it becomes pretty apparent that the industry itself is speaking with a forked tongue. This Decades of Expansion Word document comes out of Portland. And this was one of those sort of retrospectives in 2020, I believe it was, where local developers, so this is local, where they were looking back and saying, wow, it's been like 10 years of just gorging at the table. This hyper supply JPEG is also pretty interesting, where this visual, I think, helps us to understand sort of how this level of opportunistic speculation looks at regionally where to prospect, and this sort of intentional cycles so that they can hedge their bets as they ratchet up prices, as they buy, hold, and then as they pivot in this game of housing musical chairs. So then for the bigger picture, under Wall Street Landlords, links. And then a grab bag. These are articles that I think are definitely worth reading. Try to keep it somewhat limited, but as time permits, again, these are narratives that we're not reading that are not public facing for the most part. Lots of valuable insights there from the mouth in the words of the Hydra itself. Opportunity zones. We've talked a little bit about opportunity zones outside of this video. So here is some useful information about that. This is a good starting point here, this OZ useful links document that begins with sort of some foundational understanding and visualizations of what the opportunity zones are, how they operate, why they're extremely attractive for global private equity, for a place to put these windfall profits from the stock market or ill-gotten gains. Also, how it also is very advantageous for those who are laundering money. They no longer have to use no longer have to park it offshore in the Caymans. The Trump administration designated almost every city in the country opportunity zones. In Portland, they designated the most valuable land on both sides of the water. And so there's some information here about just how that operates and how they not only provides being able to avoid capital gains taxes on those windfall profits almost in their entirety, but there's also what they call the triple bottom line tax breaks, and how that stacks up. And then we've got some further looking at following the Portland Opportunity Zone money. And if you get this far, when you've got time, I recommend hitting all these links. And particularly where it pertains to Clyde Holland, Nicholas Berg-Ruin, Up for Growth Coalition, so on and so forth. Again, here, and this Wall Street's big opportunity, this I think is pretty user-friendly. Also, it's a little bit longer read, but from a broader perspective, some really good talking points. And I think understanding this and being able to translate this into a way that people can understand is going to be kind of pivotal to the demand to remove the state of Oregon's ban on real estate transfer taxes. That's something that they can't circumvent, and a way to tax the ultra wealthy every time they not only flip at this level, but even when they purchase it. Let's say Blackstone purchases it, and then they create a distinct LLC or shell company for each of their separate developments, and then they just register basically that title change, even though it isn't a sale. So every time some of those things happen, understanding opportunity zones as a giant tax avoidance, national tax avoidance scheme. We can redirect that understanding at a demand that takes some of that back and redistributes it. And where do we want to put that? One of the places, which I will get to in a second, underneath Wall Street Landlords, opportunity zones, grab bag, tabula rasa. Really, what I'm going to go into here is this prop tech and fintech vertical integration. We've talked a little bit about that, and it's not that it's a complex thing to break down. It's just that it's at such a scale and at such a scale of overwhelm that without visual aids, it becomes this abstraction and people start overcomplicating in their mind. So here's some visual aids to start with. Understanding what is a property tech ecosystem when I use that phrase. and the definition of property tech. It's a bunch of different things that all intersect. And property tech, real estate, financial technology, shared economy. I mean, who's sharing with whom? Construction tech, smart real estate, if you will. And when we talk about vertical integration, we're talking about a single corporate entity that either acquires, owns controlling interest in, builds, merges, whatever, in all of these stacks in order to dominate this entire sort of this entire ecosystem within an ecosystem of financialization at scale. So property tech trends will help give you some more insight and visualizations like this. What are some of the niches inside a property tech ecosystem? Marketing, big data, investing, property management, financing, marketing, construction tech, peer-to-peer, visual startups, smart home software. Types of real estate apps, prop tech apps, construction technologies, property and facility management, fintech software, all of these things that these platforms of scale that when we're talking about global private equity financing platforms of scale like Opendoor, who are the largest vertically integrated iBuyer platforms in the country, shooting for the world. What does that mean? And why is that important for us to understand locally as well? And just as an aside, I will say it's very important for us to understand locally because the vice chair of the Portland Planning and Sustainability Commission, Eli Spivak, was in a financial partnership with Opendoor in one of his quote unquote co-housing developments, which is basically two very large expensive SROs for gig workers with two kitchens, like 22 bedrooms in each of those buildings that are on the same plot. Each bedroom rents for like $1,000 a month. Opendoor financed the construction for that, and Eli Spivak, at the same time he was in this partnership, was the Portland Planning and Sustainability Commission vice chair, deliberating on and fine-tuning the residential infill project's final recommendations for to go to city council. He is also a middle housing developer. He is also sort of Portland's local YIMBY developer of note. So these are a little overwhelming, but to read through in entirety, but they are very skimmable. So that I think will help. iBuyers, fueling Wall Street rental takeover, articles like these are all behind the firewall. So these I had to have paid accounts to get, and you don't see this kind of information in public facing. So again, these are important narratives that we can get a team of people pulling some information out, absorbing that information so that we can get people to really understand what's at play here in a way that people can digest, but also that spurs people to make some demands. Right. So when we're talking about trying to make some demands in terms of repealing Oregon's ban on the real estate transfer tax, one of the things that is now possible, since another thing that was in place, a ban statewide up until a few years ago, was a ban on municipal bond funding for housing projects. That firewall was removed just a couple legislation sessions ago, opening the door for for-profit, quote-unquote, affordable housing developers to be able to avail themselves of municipal bond funding. Previously, under the previous ban, that was only available to public works projects, those that would be owned, operated, managed by public agencies. So lifting that ban is problematic in a couple of ways. One, because that legislation did not tether it to any formal definition of what is affordable, what isn't. In other states where that firewall has been removed, it has introduced risk into the municipal bond market, and it's also rife with fraud. But I digress. One of the things that it does open up is an avenue for municipally funded community land trusts. And specifically, if an initiative like that were to be put on the ballot, to put it to the voters to remove the ban on real estate transfer tax and to have some of that tax, not all, go to community land trusts tethered to a community first right of purchase. In Portland in particular, where we have the neighborhood association infrastructure, coupling something like that, pooled money, municipally funded community land trusts, community right of purchase, there are some winning examples of how municipally funded community land trusts benefit communities and maintain housing affordability in perpetuity as a tool to not push back on, not compete with, but as a tool for communities to be able to have some impact, some tools against the voracious appetite of Wall Street landlords, while they're still allowed to do what they've been doing, which is to conjure trillions and trillions of dollars in fictitious wealth by divorcing housing from its social utility and turning it into a financialized instrument. So this useful links, these are some vetted links specific to municipally funded community land trusts. Community land trust is a big term. There's a lot of different ways to talk about and to implement community land trusts, but this is specifically focused on municipally funded and examples, tools, and one of the best examples goes back to the 1980s, the first municipally funded community land trust back in Burlington, Vermont, Bernie Sanders. So there's some really good links here, specifically from this vantage point of people who may be trying to craft a ballot measure, and also being able to not only say, we want to move the needle, here's the demand for the legislation, but over here is the benefit of doing it. Here's where that goes. Here's where that can enable. And here's some examples that started in the 80s that have preserved affordable housing, and here's the proof, decades later. So that's a good. This is a good place to start for that. Under the Wall Street landlords, we talked about opportunity zones, prop tech. In the grab bag, again, as time permits, these are some hand-picked documents that I think are well worth reading. And in particular, there's some graphics in here that can be culled to help translate some of the complexity, or also just to really underscore the treachery. You can see here the rise of the corporate landlord. This is a fantastic graphic. This is the document that came from. Wall Street landlords turn the American dream into a nightmare. Really, really uplifting stuff here, but important to be able to talk about in some ways that may not be great news, but that in some ways that people can digest, assimilate, and it validates the experience and the truth on the ground. One of the other things that we had talked about is sort of the counterbalance to all the doom and gloom and the overwhelm and the bigness of Wall Street financialization of housing and prop tech and fintech. This is there's a links page in here to some links specific to some of the work that Leilani Farha, who is the former UN Special Reporter for Housing, so Credibility Plus, who has done great work both while working with the UN and after. And one of the things that I think is going to be really important and also really accessible is a documentary that she was involved in called Push. So there's some links here to that. And this documentary has been making the rounds at different film festivals. They also specifically make it available to be shown in different sizes of groups, whether it's whether you want to show it in a large theater or at a for a class or what have you. And also along with that, after viewing the film, to be able to have a Q&A with the with the makers of the film, sometimes including Leilani Farha herself. that documentary also breaks down a lot of the complexity of Wall Street financialization and has a really great balance between sort of the intellectual understanding as a baseline and then also the truth on the ground. Leilani Farha in the film going around talking to renters in cities and in buildings where the entire building, sometimes entire neighborhoods been purchased up by these nameless, faceless Wall Street corporations, and what happens, what's the impact. And it's a well-made film. It's got a good balance. It doesn't go too heavy, it doesn't go too light, but it's also got credibility, and it's also got reach. There are interviews within it with Asasia Saskin, with Robert Reich, and Leilani Farha herself is not only, as I mentioned, credible but engaging, and I think all around it's something that we need to get here and get people talking about as a baseline, so that we can start out all on the same page, and we can stop spinning wheels trying to repeat the same concepts. This is what financialization is. This is what financialization is. I think that the ground is fertile enough now. Maybe it wasn't so a couple years ago, but I think we're there now. And then part of one of the other things that she was involved with is called the shift, and this is specifically the shift. It is dovetails into the work that was done as part of the UN, but is specifically around, here are some tools for policy making around, number one, recognizing housing as a human right, number two, understanding what's at play and what's at stake when it comes to financialization, and here is how local governments can understand it. Here is some ready-made documents to further that conversation with policymakers and community advocates, and then here are some policy recommendations. And there's also a podcast, Pushback Talks. Fantastic, again, engaging different ways that people can connect to this information and to be able to consume it in ways that are broken down into easier to digest meals, if you will. Other articles and things of that nature. So highly recommended that we try to get that film seen here. Maybe even a small little film festival. There are other films that are worth putting into it, and I think everybody wants to talk about it. But finding ways that make those conversations accessible and get us all on the same page. So that's what this folder here is, and I think this again is a good counterweight to the gloom and doom, to say not only can we talk about, like, here's municipally funded community land trusts over here. Here are some common sense tools, and rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, trying to think of this in terms of all of the work that needs to be done at the grassroots level. There's still that much work, but how to work strategically, how to connect with, reach out, pull in some of the work that's being done at that level of credibility and reach, and sharpen the stick here locally, and focus on from a multiplicity of angles. And last but not least, I have put in sort of a work in progress to file. You'll see here some, I think, important visualizations of some other things that we may or may not have talked about, like low-income housing tax credit, buildings and expiry. Homelessness climbs faster when rent affordability reaches 22% and 32% thresholds. This is a really important graphic. And then we've got some visualizations for income distribution. Again, some of those local mapping images. Build to rent, which is something that is sort of a new concept. We can talk about that later. You can read through some authoritative studies or documents that are both local and national, but I tried to mostly focus on local. Lisa Bates, of course. All of the Portland Housing Bureau state of housing. This is basically some excerpts from that. There's the Portland Housing Bureau reports are also included in another folder where we had the industry reports. But this is some stuff that, again, yet to file, but things like this were some takeaways from one of the reports that a lot of people don't necessarily read the entire report to pull out some of the insights. So this is an example of some of the insights that I pulled out from a previous year. I think it was in 2020's report. So we've got authoritative sources, academic, contesting neoliberal urbanism. A lot of this again, for different audiences, but depending on the multiplicity of angles, I think that being able to digest some of this stuff according to people's strengths, the language that they're most familiar with, to be able to break stuff down and speak to different audiences. So again, work in progress. So I think that's all for now. Coming up on 1 hour. I appreciate your attention and your patience. And I have a lot more things to get out of my noggin and out into the world. This, I hope, is a good starting place so that we can get some people engaged and get some feedback, and then we can start building out a framework for some focused actions moving forward. I think the place that I personally want to focus, and the place that needs a lot of time and energy, is under the RIP underutilized strike price map. This is a particularly good time to go back. And since developers were given were stealthily provided with 2 years ahead of its passage, down to the lot, saying here's where to, if here's where to buy, here's where to hold, here's if you're getting in early, this is where to strike. And what I would like to do, I've already again extracted this level in my mapping program, and what I'd like to do is then take this data subset and scrape the Multnomah County Tax Assessor's Office for all of the sales history for all of these lots, going back a couple of years prior to when this map was provided. I believe it was provided in 2018 up until the present. And I've been doing this long enough that I know exactly what I know what we're going to find. And every time my technical intuition drives me to do that kind of work, which takes time and effort and focus, and even though I'm by now sort of a catastrophist, every time I do the work and I come back out and let the data give up its own narrative, my jaw still drops to the floor, and I am still filled with righteous indignation. Even though I expect it to be bad, it's always worse than I expected. So this is work that I really think is extremely valuable. And then what to do with it when the work is done, how to shape that into something that people can consume in a variety, and that we can distribute and publicize in a variety of different formats and bump to get people engaged. And since it's right here at home, and to connect it to the bigger picture, and then to bring in, data like, Blackstone, how much prospecting they've been doing right here, and then to make some demands for some additional public data that says, now we want to see all of it. And to be able to craft some things, and now that we've got more candidates for city council entering the ring, especially at this point in time where we've now got more districts. And I think that allows candidates to take a lot more risks in their talking points, and to agitate and to make demands. And I think that's what people want. And so I think that we can take a couple of different angles, but this is particularly where I think that a lot of time and effort would be well spent. I just can't do it alone. I mean, I could, but I think at this point, it might do me in. I've done this before. I'm also going to put, I'm going to drop in the document, the study that I did on the single unit exemption to Portland's renter relocation ordinance that I created and then put into the hands of, at that time, a city council representative, and said, let's release this. And it was good timing, and it did move the needle. And I'd like to be able to mount a similar effort, except I'd like to have a bigger game plan and some resources to make sure that it gets some traction in these in these directions. So thank you for spending an hour watching my cartoon face show you my files and talking about them. And I'm excited about doing the work. I'm excited about it being the right time to do this work. and the um, the importance, the critical nature of doing it, not just here at home, but um, before the next presidential election. I think we need to build some momentum that connects what's happening here at home with what's happening in the country and what's happening in the world, particularly the source of our suffering, the source of this kind of extraction, naming names and pulling facts and making demands. So, thank you again.